Okay. So 360score.me. So, I want to give you a little bit of background behind the tool and why we're using it. It's very basic. It is a 360-degree review tool. So something that other organizations are pretty familiar with or have done in the past. A lot of folks have done paper 360-degree review surveys or have it bundled into other products. But what's unique about us is we have some specific ways that we get radical candor, the honest feedback that's trapped in the organization, out from everyone's heads so that way everyone can benefit from it. The fundamental point here is not just managers, but we feel that everyone in the organization is potentially a teacher. And since we work with each other, we know potentially what each other's blind spots are. And without a tool like this, unfortunately, sometimes we don't have an opportunity to share that with each other. And so we continue on with our blind spots without being able to move the needle on it. Okay, the first piece I want to touch on is anonymity. And anonymity is not just a feature of the tool, it is one of the integral parts of what makes this successful in relation to a lot of other tools that are out there. We find if a tool does not have anonymity, people will score each other 10 to 15 points higher than they will in an anonymous tool. And the reason for that is very simple. Giving somebody a high score has no cost, meaning there's no perceived cost. That cost could be fear of that this is going to come back to you somehow. It could just be guilt. You know, there's guilt in giving somebody a low score. And so what happens is when you have a system where there's no cost, meaning giving somebody a high score, or a system where there is a cost by giving someone a low score, people will deviate to where there is a low cost. One of the best examples of this is Uber or Lyft. In Uber or Lyft, 95% of scores are a 5 out of 5. And so what ends up happening is if 95% of scores are 5 out of 5, you've basically watered down the value of what a 5 out of 5 is. And every other score essentially is almost like an F. It has gotten so bad that essentially with Uber or Lyft, unless somebody vomits in the car, you have to give them a 5 out of 5. And so we don't want that to be the case. We want an A in our system or a 5 out of 5 equivalent to mean something. And so that's why it's really important to make sure that anonymity gives us the safety to be able to grade each other the way that we actually are. And the reality is, we're thinking and we have an idea of what each other's reputation is, whether we share it with each other or not. This just gives us the mechanism to be able to do so. There's a couple of ways that we protect anonymity, but one in particular is that we don't even share someone's score until they have at least 5 unique scores from their teammates. And so that's the way that we ensure that even supervisors can't try to game the system and figure out what individual is scoring others. A point that's brought up to us is a lot of the times, you know, these tools are there to increase the transparency in an organization, to make an organization more open, so that way we can have honest conversations with each other. But then the irony is, well, what about anonymity? Isn't anonymity the opposite of that? And so I want to touch on this irony, this twist between where an anonymous system actually makes an organization more transparent. And I'll tell you why. And the reason why is because the safety of anonymity allows people, some people don't need anonymity and they'll speak their mind regardless of the system that you give them. But a lot of folks require the safety of anonymity to be able to share and be transparent with others. Now, they're not going to be transparent about who they are, but they are going to now have a higher likelihood of sharing with others what they have in their mind, especially that difficult feedback that potentially is normally locked up in a system where you do not have anonymity. So yes, the irony is transparency is served by anonymity, because we make sure that we get so much more data out there that otherwise would be locked in people's heads and never shared with each other. So before I get into what can go right, I want to start off with what can go wrong, because we want to make sure that we use this tool appropriately. Because at the end of the day, it is that. It is a tool. And a tool can be used for good or it can be used for not good. There's a whole bunch of other, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of other 360-degree review tools out there that have failed. And there's a wide variety of reasons behind that. But we want to make sure that we're all aware of what can go wrong. And so, for example, we don't want this to be a popularity contest. This is an anonymous system. And so people won't know that you are giving them good votes or bad votes. So, however, people will potentially feel the need to focus on certain areas in order to make sure that they are popular. Bullying. We want to make sure that there's no bullying. A way that we protect that is all responses are first go to the supervisor to ensure that the material that is being shared is safe to pass along to the individuals. However, obviously, there's something that can come out of this tool. That's why we're using it in the first place. And the biggest reason is many organizations have metrics and goals tied around performance. And a lot of those have to do with customer satisfaction. A lot of those have to do with revenue generation. But this tool allows being a teammate, the quality of how you treat your coworkers, to now be elevated just as high as those other metrics. This now gives us an ability to measure that. Because the reality is, we all have judgments of each other, whether we're sharing them or not. This now gives us a mechanism to be able to share it. And the mechanism that we use, rather than coming up with our own scale, we use the scale that most everyone is already familiar with, and that is the traditional A to F letter grading scale. Now, when we first tell people that you're going to grade your coworkers on an A to F scale, very rarely do people have no opinion about that. It can be intimidating. It can be a point of concern as to, well, can this become a popularity contest? Or how do I fairly grade a coworker? And the one point we want to remind folks is, do not be intimidated by this. This may be new to you, so you have to know how to use it effectively. But as I said before, we all have judgments of each other, whether we turn it into a letter grade or not. By giving someone a score, by giving them feedback, even if it's difficult, you are now giving them the ability to get better. If you have a judgment of someone and you just keep it in your head, if you think somebody is a D and you keep it in your head, you are doing them no justice at all. You are actually being far kinder by sharing with them what they need to work on. Likewise, on the flip side, if you think somebody is an exceptional coworker, keeping it in your head is not going to give them the positive reinforcement that they need to continue to do the things that are exceptional. And so that's why this scale is important. It's important that we all agree on what a score means, because otherwise we have the risk of becoming like that Uber system where everyone just gives everyone a 5 unless something goes really horrible. So I want to remind everyone, a C is average, not a 95. A 95 is not average. If you give 95s to everybody, you're essentially saying that everyone you work with is literally the most exceptional coworker you've ever had in your life. Now, maybe you have 1 or 2 of those, but you do not have all of your coworkers there. Because the problem is, if we give everyone a 95, we water down what a 95 means. A C is average. And so once we have a scale that we all agree on, hopefully the scores that are resultant from this system, we will also all agree on. So that's why the A to F scale, even though it can be intimidating initially, is really important to make sure that we're all on the same page and using it so that way the scores, when we ultimately get them, we all believe them and understand them and know what they mean. Okay. I want to get now into what feedback looks like. A lot of folks, this will be the first time that you will be asked to provide feedback and coaching to your coworkers. Even managers, managers theoretically are taught and trained on how to provide feedback, but that's not always the case either. Providing feedback in a healthy manner is a skill, and it's one that's normally developed. And what we like to say is 360 Score allows all of us to be each other's coaches. The wisdom in the organization is not just at the top, it is everywhere. And in order for us to be able to get it out of the organization, not only do we need to give them a mechanism to do so, and that's what 360 Score does, but we need to teach everyone how to do it effectively. So, feedback. First, I want to go focus on what bad feedback looks like, what we want to avoid. So, and from two different perspectives, from the sender as well as from the receiver. So a sender, blunt, careless complaints, treats you like an object. So when you're sharing feedback, we don't want to just have a blurting problem and share something that might be a little bit rude or callous. Similarly, on the receiver side, if you're overly sensitive, insecure, or you have anxiety about looking stupid or weak, that is a problem. Meaning you're not going to be able to get better if this is the mentality that you have when receiving feedback. However, how to have it be good, what good feedback looks like. From the sender point of view, it should be objective. It should show them that you want them to get better. You're not just treating them like an object. You want them to find success. Ultimately, this is what a teacher does. A teacher, the goal is for somebody to learn something and for somebody to get better. And same thing, on the receiver side, the ideal receiver, those that benefit the most from this tool, are those that are students, that want to learn, that want to get better, that don't just get offended, but look for those nuggets of wisdom in the feedback that they get. So a couple more hints about what good feedback looks like. I'm going to touch on this real quick, radical candor and getting out of the box. So this is something from a lady called Kim Scott, who was a previous executive at Google, about what the ideal type of feedback looks like. We want to be in this top right quadrant, which is a mix of challenging directly and caring personally. That is the ideal type of feedback that we want people to give. Just to quickly touch on it, for example, ruinous empathy. That's when you're not challenging directly, but you do care for them personally. That is the equivalent of like spoiling parent. That does not want to tell the kid the truth and allows the kid to go on and misbehave and then be a problem to the world just because they didn't have the guts to challenge them directly. Obnoxious aggression, believe it or not, this is the second best. Because obnoxious aggression, at least you're telling people the truth. At least you're telling them their blind spots. Now, your delivery might be a little bit less than ideal, or a lot less than ideal, but at least you are getting results. Now, you might be causing some trauma in the meantime. So, for the point of our tool, let's try definitely not to be ruinously empathetic, meaning, which is what most people do, by the way. Most people find themselves in that box. They're just too nice to tell people the truth. They're too nice to tell people the difficult thing that people need to work on. And so people just end up continuing to make the mistakes. Ruinous empathy is why blind spots exist, because we don't talk to each other and we don't tell each other how we need to get better. Let's not try to do obnoxious aggression. Let's try to stay in radical candor. But how do we do that? Giving feedback, empathy, and honesty. That's how they will know that we are not being obnoxious or aggressive, that we are doing this because we care for them. And when receiving it, to be self-aware and open. The concept of sandwiching, which is if you have some very difficult feedback to share with someone, sandwich it in between some other things that are complementary. Meaning start off with something that is maybe pleasant about the individual, something that they're doing well, and then share something maybe a little bit more difficult, and then follow up with something positive again. Now, that takes time. That takes time. There's no doubt about it. And the harsher the truth, the more time you need to take to make sure it's delivered effectively. Because if you want to be effective, yeah, it takes time. A lot of people like to have the mentality of, I just like say it how it is. Well, that might very well be the case, but you're going to find yourself down in the obnoxious aggression area. And the problem is you're going to find yourself to be less effective. So if the goal is to be effective, if the goal is to actually share something that you want somebody to move the needle on, you have to take time. You have to take time to let them know that you care and that you're not just blurting something out. Okay, here's another area just when people sometimes have not provided feedback to others. Here's a helpful list of questions that you can answer for them. Meaning absent having some other awareness of what you want to share with the individual. If you can just answer these questions, you're going to do them a lot of good. Meaning, if you're providing feedback for the individual, if you can answer these questions for them, you're going to be very helpful. What brings out the best in them, worst, strengths and weaknesses, what are their blind spots? If you were going to be working with them for the first time tomorrow, what would you share? What would somebody who is working with that person for the first time, what would they need to know? When the survey is completed, the survey results go to individuals' supervisors. And the importance for that, once again, is to ensure that the feedback that is being delivered is on point. It is not, there's no bullying, there's nothing inappropriate, and then that is shared in the version of a 360 report with everyone. Scores are weighted based on your proximity to individuals. So if you work closely with someone, that person's score of you will count a lot more than somebody who you just, in passing, may not work with that much. And that is all, and those weightings, that scoring weighting is all dictated based on your proximity to them in the org chart. If you have less than 5 responses, we don't even calculate a 360 score for you. Remember, this was to protect anonymity. So everyone has to have a minimum of at least 5 unique responses in order for us to be able to calculate those responses. There's a 360 score. There's some additional questions then that the organization can set, additional criteria, and I'll show you in a little bit exactly how that works in a sample survey. Those comments now that you've shared with each other, those comments are reviewed by the individual supervisor and upvoted or downvoted as being helpful. Not upvoted or downvoted for being positive or negative, but just upvoted or downvoted for being helpful. If you are providing meaningful comments, useful comments, and you've spent time on that, you will get credit for that. And that is tabulated into what's known as a contributor score. So everyone will also have a contributor score that measures how effective or significant a coach you have been in the organization. Because as I said before, the only coaches are not necessarily managers. There's coaches all within the organization. And those that are spending the time and energy to share that feedback with each other, those will be recognized as well. Okay, so I just want to give you an idea of what to expect. So when you first log on to 360score.me, or when the organization first signs up for the service, everyone in the organization will be sent an invitation email to join that organization. So here's just a sample business. You will get an email inviting you to create an account. Then the only thing you have to do is set a password. And this is really important because remember, we want this to be anonymous and controlled by you. So you have to have your own unique password to be able to log in, submit a survey, so that way we know it's from you and not from somebody else, as well as see the results. After you set that password, you will have an account, and then you will, normally we recommend it's on a quarterly basis, you will actually receive your survey. So this is what the survey looks like. You will receive a survey email, and then you'll be able to log in and actually submit one. So here's a demo survey. We optionally have a question at the top to evaluate yourself. So this is your opportunity to provide feedback about yourself. Once again, optional for you to share, to score yourself. And remember the grading scale. We remind people what that score, we have words to go along with the scores. So for example, C+ is slightly above average, or a B is a solid player, but it's all on the grading scale. So you score yourself, you put in any comments, and then you have a list of your coworkers. And in most organizations, you will have anywhere between 10 to 20 people that you will be asked to leave a score for. You know, obviously every organization is different, but in most organizations you have 10 to 20 people. By the way, whether you're a 20-person organization or a 200-person organization, most people have about 10 to 20 people that they work with regularly. And obviously some departments may have more, some departments may have less, but then you will see that list of individuals below, and then you will give them a score. You have a nice opportunity here to have additional questions where you can give them a little bit more granularity. So for example, in this circumstance, Ralph, we're saying, is an 84, and I can kind of pass along the message to Ralph that the area that he needs to work on is this unselfish, team-focused, and reliability, just by these additional questions. Now, if I truly want to give him a gift, I will then go on in the comments and explain in a little bit more detail. The interesting thing that we find is when people first start using this tool, anonymity is incredibly important because they've never done this before. They don't know what to trust. They don't know how this is going to come back to them. And so we find a lot of people who are very concerned about anonymity out of the gate. By the second or third survey, we find people stop caring about anonymity, at least in organizations that have done this well. And the reason we know that is because by the second or third survey, we find that people in their comments start sharing specific examples to make it more helpful to provide feedback. You know, so if they tell someone, for example, they have an issue with communication, they'll give them an example of where it could have been better. But what is that person doing? That person's also kind of exposing who they are. But you know what? And by the way, they're comments. So in a comment, you can say, this is Rashad. You could. And we're not necessarily going to stop that mechanism. The key thing is we want to give you the safety of anonymity if you choose to use it. But what's cool is in organizations where this works well, people find safety and they don't need anonymity anymore. And the way that they find safety is if you share feedback with someone and you don't have negative repercussions. Actually, the reverse happens. They change. They learn. They get better. They actually pay attention to what you told them. Guess what? The next time, I'm probably going to be more willing to share, maybe a little bit more with you. Because I know you are somebody who is a student, who wants to learn, who wants to get better. And so as the surveys keep going on, anonymity remains there the whole time. But the reality is healthy organizations end up not needing it as much because now they have a culture of openness. They have a culture of transparency, which ironically was initially kicked off with anonymity. But now they don't care about it, and they're more than happy to expose each other to and let each other know who they are. So I'm not suggesting that everyone says who they are in their comments right now, but the point here is it's a tool, and use it how you see fit. The point here is to get all of this knowledge that we have tied in our heads about each other and make it actionable. As long as it stays in our heads and it doesn't get communicated, we can do nothing about this. But once we're able to put it out in front of each other, that's when we get better.